I was 19 when I first met Daniel. It was at a summer festival in our small coastal town, the kind with flickering lanterns, live music on a makeshift stage, and the smell of salt in the evening breeze. I remember the way he laughed, freely, as if life hadn't yet taught him about heavy things like deadlines, responsibilities, or heartbreak. We spent that entire summer walking along the beach, talking about everything and nothing. He was my first love, that innocent, all-consuming kind, where the future feels wide open and every look holds a promise, but life has a way of scattering people like leaves in the wind. He was offered a scholarship abroad, and I had just started university in the city. We promised to stay in touch, but the world was big, and time moved faster than our letters. By the end of that year, our messages became less frequent, then faded into silence. The years that followed took us down very different roads. Daniel built a career overseas, moving from one country to another, chasing opportunities that I only ever saw in magazines. I, on the other hand, stayed closer to home. I finished my degree, got married young, too young, maybe, and tried to build a life that felt stable. There was love in my marriage, at least at first, but it was a quiet, practical kind. We raised two wonderful children, shared holidays, and celebrated small victories. But somewhere along the way, the connection faded. We grew into different people, and eventually, we let each other go, kindly, almost gratefully. Daniel, as far as I knew, never married. Occasionally, his name would come up in old conversations with friends, but he was more of a warm memory than a real person to me, like a song from another lifetime. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday, of all days. I had taken a day off work to visit a little cafe downtown, the kind I go to when I need a break from the world. Warm lights, quiet music, the smell of cinnamon and fresh bread. I was standing in line, scrolling through my phone, when I heard a voice behind me ask, "Excuse me, is this seat taken?" I turned around, and for a moment, the world stood still. Daniel, older, of course, a little silver in his hair, fine lines at the corners of his eyes, but unmistakably him. My heart did that strange skipping thing I hadn't felt in years. Neither of us spoke right away. We just looked at each other, as if trying to bridge the decades between us with a single glance. I think I forgot how to breathe for a second. All those years melted away, and suddenly, I was that 19-year-old girl again, standing under the lanterns by the sea. My fingers trembled slightly as I set down my coffee cup, afraid he might vanish if I blinked. Daniel smiled, that same, familiar, unhurried smile. "It's really you," he said softly, as though saying it too loudly might break the spell. I felt a rush of emotions. Surprise, warmth, a hint of sadness for all the years lost, but mostly a strange, quiet joy. I hadn't expected to feel anything like this again, not at this stage in my life. "Daniel," I finally managed to say, my voice catching. "It's been what, 25 years?" We found a table by the window, the kind with warm wooden chairs, and a view of the street where autumn leaves swirled lazily in the wind. At first, the conversation stumbled. Polite questions about work, family, the city. But soon, the years between us began to dissolve. He told me about his life, the countries he'd lived in, the projects he'd led, the adventures that had shaped him. I shared my own story, my marriage, my children, the quiet routines that had carried me through the years, and the loneliness that came after it all unraveled. There was no bitterness in our words, only an easy honesty. It felt like opening an old book you once loved and finding the pages still warm. At one point, he looked at me and said, "You haven't changed much." I laughed softly. "Neither have you, except for the gray hair. It suits you." As the afternoon slipped into evening, something gentle yet undeniable stirred between us. It wasn't the wild, urgent pull of our youth. It was quieter, steadier, like a warm tide rising slowly. Every smile felt familiar. Every shared memory rekindled something I thought had been tucked away forever. We talked about the summer we first met, the beach walks, the long talks, the promises we couldn't keep. There was no blame, just a shared wistfulness. When he touched my hand to emphasize a story, it felt both strange and utterly natural. My heart beat faster, not because of lost time, but because of what might still be found. In that cozy cafe, surrounded by the home of strangers, I realized the space between us was no longer empty. It was filling again, with something tender and real. After that day, we began to meet more often, sometimes for coffee, sometimes for quiet walks along the riverside. It felt easy, unforced, as if our lives had been gently waiting for this chance to cross again. We rediscovered the simple joy of being in each other's company, sharing stories, laughing at old jokes, exploring corners of the city we had both somehow missed over the years. There was no rush, no pressure, just two people learning who they had become and finding comfort in how naturally their paths aligned once more. Sometimes I caught him looking at me with that same softness he had all those years ago, and I wonder if he could see the same in my eyes. One evening, as the city lights reflected on the river, we found ourselves speaking not just of memories, but of what might come next. There was a quiet pause between us, the kind that carries weight, the kind that asks a question without saying it. Daniel spoke first. "I'm tired of living out of suitcases," he said with a half smile. "I've spent so many years chasing places, but maybe it's time to stay still, to find something real again." I felt my heart stir at those words. For the first time in a long while, I thought about the future with a sense of possibility, not just routine. We talked about the places we'd like to see together, the simple days we could share, markets on weekends, a small garden in spring, quiet evenings with a book between us. It wasn't a plan, not yet, but it was a beginning. As much as hope filled those conversations, there was also a tremor of fear, the kind that comes when you stand at the edge of something fragile and new. I had built a life before, piece by piece, and watched it shift into something unrecognizable. Starting again meant risking my heart, my balance, my carefully rebuilt peace. Daniel seemed to sense it too. There were moments when his smile faltered, when a quiet shadow crossed his face. "What if we've changed too much?" I asked one evening, my voice barely above the rustle of the wind. He took a slow breath before answering. "Then maybe we'll learn each other all over again. Change isn't always the enemy. Sometimes it's the bridge." Slowly, we began to let each other in, not just to our routines, but to the deeper corners of our lives. He met my children over dinner one weekend, and I met the small circle of friends who had been his makeshift family while he traveled the world. There were moments of quiet tenderness, a shared umbrella in the rain, a text late at night, just to say goodnight, a cup of tea left waiting for me on a cold morning. Each one, small as it was, carried a weight of meaning. I started to notice the way he listened, really listened, when I spoke, and how easily I could laugh again in his presence. It wasn't about recreating what we had lost. It was about discovering something that had grown deeper with time. It happened quietly, without declarations or dramatic gestures. One evening, while we were walking home, he brushed a stray strand of hair from my face, and the world seemed to pause, just like it had that first summer, only softer now, calmer. There was a look in his eyes, not of longing for the past, but of recognition, as if he finally saw me as I was now, and loved that version just as much. My heart answered before my mind could catch up. From then on, the air between us changed. A lingering touch on the hand lasted a second longer. A goodbye hug felt more like a promise than a farewell. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the space that had once been filled with years of absence began to fill with something warm and certain. One Sunday afternoon, we found ourselves sitting on a quiet park bench, sunlight filtering through the golden leaves. For the first time, we spoke openly about what this renewed connection meant. "I don't want to waste time," Daniel said softly, taking my hand in his. "Life's too short to let fear decide our story." I felt a lump in my throat, a mixture of hope and vulnerability. "Neither do I whispered. "I've spent years imagining this moment, and yet it feels like the beginning." We didn't make grand promises or plan out every detail of the future. Instead, we made a quiet commitment to see where this could go, together, without letting the ghosts of the past hold us back. It was simple, but it felt like the most profound step we had ever taken. In the weeks that followed, we embraced life's simple joys together. Morning walks became a ritual. We explored hidden corners of the city, discovered little cafes tucked away on side streets, and spent lazy afternoons reading in the park. We shared dreams we had once thought too far-fetched: a small seaside trip, a cozy cottage for weekends, even the thought of planting a little garden together. Each plan, each shared laugh, felt like a thread weaving our lives closer. It wasn't about rushing or recreating the past. It was about savoring the present, building memories that belonged solely to us, and finding joy in the ordinary moments that had somehow become extraordinary when shared with him. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold, we sat on the old pier where our childhood summers had begun. The quiet lapping of the water mirrored the rhythm of my thoughts, calm, steady, hopeful. "I never imagined we'd find each other again," I said softly. Daniel smiled, his hand covering mine. "Sometimes life has its own plans. We just have to be brave enough to follow them." In that moment, I realized that the past no longer felt like a weight. Instead, it was a foundation, a reminder of what had been, and a guide for what could be. We were no longer two separate lives brushing past each other. We were stepping into a shared future, one filled with the promise of love, rediscover, and new memories waiting to be made. The first time we truly embraced our second chance, it felt like coming home, not to a place but to each other. The years apart had shaped us, given us wisdom and perspective, but they hadn't dulled the spark that had first brought us together. We laughed about our past mistakes, celebrated the resilience that had carried us here, and quietly dreamed about all the moments yet to come. Life had given us a rare gift, a chance to love not as we once did, but with the depths and tenderness of two people who had truly grown. As we walked hand in hand along the familiar streets of our town, I felt a profound sense of hope. The future was uncertain, yes, but it was ours to share. And for the first time in decades, I believed that some love, if nurtured and given time, could indeed last, in new, beautiful ways, forever ready to bloom again.